Hello and welcome to the Thursday, January 22nd, 2026 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich and today I'm recording from Jacksonville, Florida. And this episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Bachelor's Degree Program in Applied Cybersecurity. In Diaries today, we have Xavier talk about the automatic script execution in Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is a development environment. It's much more than a simple editor. And like most of these IDEs, it has the ability to execute code. One way this is done in Visual Studio Code is by using a .vs code directory, and inside that a tasks.json file. What happens is, as Visual Studio Code opens a file, it checks for this directory, and the task.json file will then define certain actions to execute on specific events, like in the example that Xavier presents whenever a new folder is opened. So that way an attacker can easily smuggle code as part of some project that they're offering, for example, for download, and then execute it inside the developer's editor. This is a technique that has been used in several attacks, so there's nothing really new. Similar stuff has been done with Visual Studio Code extensions, for example. But I think the most important lesson here is whenever you download like source code and then open it in a complex environment like Visual Studio Code, well, there is a possibility that code is being executed, so you better trust that code. Some development environments, like for example, the ones developed by JetBrains that are very popular, will give you sort of a warning when you open a file. It asks you, well, do you trust the file or not, which will then trigger this behavior or keep it just in sort of a normal editor mode where it doesn't execute any code. Either way, whenever you edit code, make sure that you trust the code, and you may want to check for any mechanisms like this, like these tasks.json file for Visual Studio Code, but they look slightly different for every development environment. And Cisco released several patches today. The most noteworthy one is a critical vulnerability in the Cisco Unified Communications product. There's an entire sort of product family that is sort of under this umbrella. They all suffer from this vulnerability. It's rated critical. CVSS score is a little bit low, I think, for this vulnerability. Base score of 8.2. The problem is that we have one of those typical vulnerabilities where user input isn't properly validated. It doesn't really state the exact nature of the problem here, but it says that an unauthenticated attacker could obtain user privileges and then later escalate them to root. So basically lead to a complete system compromise, which is why I think this may deserve a higher CVSS score, but it's not really clear if they're really talking about the same vulnerability here or just two different vulnerabilities chained together to get to the complete root access on the device. Either way, patch your setups. And then we have a critical vulnerability in Zoom that has been patched. This one affects the Zoom Node multimedia routers, so not sort of the Zoom desktop product, but it's critical and sort of interesting also because it does allow arbitrary code execution. So that's why it has a CVSS score of 9.9 and should be quickly patched. In order to exploit the vulnerability, user and attacker has to be a participant of a Zoom meeting that is using this Zoom Node multimedia router. And Fortinet users are reporting that they're seeing successful exploit attempts against Fortinet firewalls that are perfectly patched, in particular patched against CVE 2025-59718, a single sign-on vulnerability that was patched back in December. And apparently what is going on here is that a new variation of the exploit is able to bypass the patch. Haven't seen any sort of official note from Fortinet yet, but a user in the Fortinet Reddit did quote communication with a Fortinet developer confirming that the vulnerability persists and is not really fixed yet in 7.4.10, and there should soon be a 7.4.11 version coming out, as well as respective updates for 7.6 and 8.0. So keep looking out for that. In the meantime, just sort of disabling the single sign-on feature works as a workaround. That was the workaround that was also recommended back when the vulnerability was originally discovered and before it was patched in December. And SANS is asking for your help with the 10th annual SOC survey. It's sort of one of the big surveys that SANS does every year. And now for 10 years in a row. So if you're working in a SOC or even if you're managing it, please share your experience. This has been sort of one of the bigger surveys that SANS does each year. Has been quite helpful in the past. So please help us out here in just answering a couple questions. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks for listening. Thanks for liking and thanks for subscribing to this podcast. And as always, talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.